Hannah. So hi everyone. Hannah's the second person to remind me today that I was a speaker at the 2013 PLMW. I'd sort of forgotten about that, but that's awesome. So hi, welcome. I kind of want to start with a sense of the room. How many of you are not PhD students yet? Okay, excellent. And how many of you are sort of, I guess, early stage PhD students? Okay, so I have about a half-half, right? But more people who have not yet started a PhD program. All right, so I just have some sort of high-level bits of advice on how to attend POPL. Somewhere along here, I should say something a little bit about myself. Just for the facts, you know, I did my undergrad at Brown. I had no intention whatsoever at the time to get a PhD in anything. Then I went off to Stanford. I got an MS in databases. Here I am doing PL. And you know, after that, I went and worked. So I'm just trying to tell you that I took a very indirect path to a PhD. After that, I went off and worked at AT&T Labs for a couple of years. I was just a developer, not a researcher. But then I kind of stumbled into PL research because I was living in Princeton, working in New Jersey. My husband at the time was a master's student in architecture at Princeton. And I just, you know, I started to get bored about a year into into this job, and I took a class at Princeton. And that's what kind of got me interested in PL research. We read it was a seminar with Andrew Appel. We read a bunch of research papers, and I was like, wow, this is neat. I really like this stuff. So I had this very, very indirect journey. I'm a very huge supporter of PLMW. I hope that it makes your journey a little less indirect. So any advice I can give you along the way, maybe helping you get there sooner and understanding whether you like this or not, it would be great. Okay, so let me kind of go in. There are two main things that I think you ought to be, getting out of being at POPL this week. One is getting a sense of what's happening in PL research, right? These are very broad goals. And the second most important thing, maybe even more important than the first, I believe, is getting to know the people in PL, right? The people in this room, the people who are senior researchers in the field, the people who are PhD students in the field, and so on. So let me just sort of talk about those two main themes. I'll start by just talking about the POPL technical program. I was the POPL program chair this year, so I sort of oversaw the program being put together. The main things in the POPL program are, you know, there's an invited talk by Victor Vafiadis tomorrow on persistent programming. Victor's been doing a lot of research on verification of concurrent programs, persistent programs for a lot of years now. There is a panel, Next 50 Years of POPL. So this is the 50th POPL. You have the distinction of being at the PLMW at the 50th POPL. It's kind of like, you know, it's a moment for us. In case you didn't know, the very first POPL was right here in Boston. So we're back. Then there are 74 papers. You know, these are the really technical papers selected from 275 submissions. And POPL is big enough now that we have, or has been for several years, we have these papers are in 2 parallel tracks. So you already know a lot of this from looking at the program, I'm sure. I want to draw your attention to these, they're in the program, you'll see that there are certain papers that have a distinguished award badge. Look out for these papers. The PC has selected these with certain criteria in mind. Not only should it be an important result, it should be papers that we think that everyone should read. You know, not just a tiny subset of the community, and they are selected if they are accessible to more accessible than usual, I should say, to a wider audience. All right, so that's something to watch out for. Maybe go to those talks. Okay. One thing that we're doing this year at POPL, often, you know, PLMW starts out with someone giving a talk about that has background on various different sessions at POPL. This year, I don't have to do that. This year, we have this session previews track, which I highly, highly encourage all of you to go to. POPL can be, you know, this program of really like daunting papers and presentations. When you're a student at PLMW, you don't understand most of it, and it's like, okay, I went to the talk, but I didn't really get it. Well, our hope is that with the session previews track, you have some, you know, you go to this 10-minute talk, which previews a session, and it gives you some background on the area. There's only so much you can do in 10 minutes, but we're hoping that this goes quite well. You get some background on the area, you get some sense of what the papers in that session are about. And also these will be running in a single track, so it really should help you figure out, you know, which one of the 2 tracks that are coming up you might want to go to. So it's a good way of maybe helping you decide. Yeah, the overall goal is to make POPL more accessible. And I'll say this. I've heard this from students year after year, especially especially if you haven't started your PhD yet, that most of these talks can seem rather difficult to follow, or 5 minutes in you're like, or 10 minutes in you're like, okay, now I don't know what's happening. The hope is to make them more accessible, but I'll admit I'm 18 years post PhD and I still don't get them all, right? Or I still don't get a lot of them. So that's just the way research works. It's a lot of the papers are going to be at a rather sophisticated, advanced level, and it's just that we are a fairly mature field at this point, so that's going to happen. So, how do you make this experience more interesting? Go to the session previews, talk to people about, maybe after the session previews, talk to your fellow PLMW attendees. Talk to people who are organizing PLMW who can, sort of chat with you and help answer more questions, provide a bit more background, a bit more context for some of this stuff. Basically, the getting to know people part will help you get to know the research part as well, and hopefully figure out what aspect, what parts of PL research you're interested in. Okay, so getting to know people. I have lots of advice on this, and I'd be happy to sort of take questions and chat a bit more, time permitting. So what I want to say is, there are icebreaker activities today as part of the PLMW program. They should be your opportunity to get to know your fellow attendees. Getting to know your peer group is really one of the best things, and that's what I think PLMW has really added over the last, this is the 11th PLMW, I think. To get to know your cohort. And when I was a first-year PhD student, I didn't really know. People kept saying that to me, yeah, get to know people, your cohort. What happens, I've seen year after year, is you get to know the people who are with you right now, perhaps at PLMW. A few years later, many of them might be PhD students with you. A few years after that, you'll all finish your PhD. You'll be collaborating with them and things like that. It's just really an amazing thing, and it makes you feel connected to the community and so on. The other advantage, in more immediate terms, get to know your fellow PLMW attendees. Most of them probably know some PhD students, or at least one senior researcher. You might end up at dinner with them, etc. Right? It expands your circle. It makes you sort of get to know more people, get to hear what other people are working on, right? In terms that are, when they're talking to you, they'll make it accessible to you. Get your questions answered, right? So that, I think, is really one of the biggest benefits. Other things, don't be afraid to approach people. If after a session preview, you had someone sort of, talk about, let's say, program synthesis, and you're like, okay, this is interesting, but I have so many follow-up questions, and that was too short. Maybe go chat with the session preview speaker during a break, right? Similarly, if you go to a POPL talk and, you have, even if you feel you have naive questions, people love talking to students, all right? Go ask them your naive questions. And they'll be delighted to stand there and explain, in depth and in very simple terms what it is they work on, why they work on it, why you should be excited about it, why they're excited about it, why it's an important problem. And that gives you a sort of, a higher level glimpse of that area, and maybe you'll start to get excited about it, right? Or even if you don't, you'll learn something important that is, at a better level, perhaps, than maybe what some of the talks might be at, or the papers, which can be rather dense to read for new students. There are poster sessions. That's, again, an excellent way. So we have, undergraduates and PhD students presenting these posters. Go chat with them. Read their poster, ask them questions. Excellent way to sort of develop your network, make more friends, get to know more people and more subjects. This is sort of more of the same. Don't be afraid to approach senior people is really what I wanted to say here. We're not scary, and we love talking to students. I've been at many PLMWs where often, there's like some, people. One year I remember there was someone who was very, very good at this. Just go up to people and say, I'm a PLMW attendee. This is my first PL conference, or maybe my first POPL. And they now know who you are, and they're usually eager to talk to you, ask them questions. And people love giving advice, whether it's advice on, hey, what sorts of this, maybe these are the subjects in PL I'm interested in. Where should I be applying for grad school? Who are the profs that I should be looking at? Or even if you have questions about, I'm worried about if you become a researcher, what happens to your work-life balance? We have lots of wisdom, lots of experiences to share. Come talk to us. love chatting about these things. Let's see. And people like talking about their research a lot, especially us prof and senior researcher types, right? I'm looking at the back row. All right. For those of you, I asked at the beginning, how many of you are are not yet PhD students? So if you're applying to PhD programs, especially if you're applying this year, but even if you're not applying this year, if you're applying next year, this is an excellent opportunity to just go up to people whom you might slightly be thinking of as prospective advisors, right? Go talk to them, find out what they're like. The success of your PhD, your research, all of that, I find that, that's another talk I give at PLMW. The biggest factor to consider when choosing PhD programs is your fit with a prospective advisor, right? So this is your chance to kind of get to know them initially, see what they're like. Hang out with PhD students or their PhD students, right? Or just any PhD students at those institutions. It tells you a lot about what what the culture at those institutions is like. Because at the end of the day, when you get your PhD, but for those of you who haven't applied yet, right? Your faculty advisor has sort of the biggest impact on your success, but also you learn so much from your peer group at whatever institution you are at. So this is your opportunity to start to get to know those people and to start to develop a sense of what different places, different labs, different advisors groups might be like, so that you can make really well-informed decisions when it's time to make them. Okay. So those are sort of the main things I wanted to say. I'm probably at the end of my time, but I'm happy to take questions, and I'm also happy to chat afterwards. Find me in breaks. So questions?
Should I walk around it? I think we can do a few questions, so just raise your hand and I can get you a mic.
Don't be shy. No.
All right, I'll ask one. Amal, what's something that you remember getting out of one of your first conferences that stuck with you?
So I think this sense of, my very first conference was ICFP in 98. My first POPL was in 2000. But I remember at ICFP in 98, I was sort of like, well, I didn't know anyone. And what was really great is starting to get to know other PhD students and going to dinner with them and getting to know other people at other institutions and finding out what kinds of things or research topics, why people were working on certain things at different institutions. So it started to really make me feel like, a part of the community. Research can be a very, very isolating endeavor, and I don't think any one of us would do it if we didn't feel like we were part of the community. So that's, really sort of the goal. And I think PLMW helps you do it better.
Hi. So this might be a really dumb question, but people do say that don't attend all the talks every single day. So my question is, how does that work? Like, what is the suggested number of talks I should attend per day so that I won't be too exhausted?
Okay, yeah. So I don't think I can give you an exact suggested number, obviously, but you're absolutely right. So this was another surprise to me when I attended my very first conference. All the profs were not going to all the talks. They were doing what we call the hallway track, where they hang out outside and they reunite with their friends and talk research and say, hey, so this is what I'm doing right now and this is where I'm stuck and how are you, right? So there's a lot of that going on and you learn a tremendous amount from that. So my advice in terms of how many talks to go to things that are interesting, and when you find yourself feeling overloaded, like you really just can't understand, so you will have a certain set of things that you really are interested in. And there, even if it's hard to understand, you should make an effort. But there will, don't feel bad about skipping out on talks that you don't seem so interested in and also seem incredibly inaccessible, right? Because at that point, you'll start to really feel a sense of overload and you'll start to zone out. So I think we all have to assess that for ourselves. Even if you're doing about, 50-50, 60-40 kind of thing, like go to 60% of the talks or 60% of the sessions, I should say, since there are parallel tracks. That might be just right. Use the other sessions to just chat with people and get to know more people. and to talk about the session that you just went to, perhaps, and say, I didn't get that, right? Like, that can really, really help.
All right, I think we can do one more.
Hi, so in the hallway track, lots of the famous people are always talking to others, and I want to talk to the famous people. So how can I, enter the...
I so get that, yes. It is so hard to like go break up a conversation between whatever, two senior people. I won't say famous people. Well, I would say linger. I mean, sometimes, the conversation can be extremely dense and technical, and so maybe it's much more awkward to linger. Or sometimes you can kind of listen in. I don't have a very good answer to this other than, feel free to join in. People will normally notice that you're there. They'll say hi. You can introduce yourself and say, I hope I'm not interrupting. Can I listen in if you think that the topic is interesting and, somewhat accessible? Depends on the level. If it's a very deep technical conversation, you just say, if they say, hi, who are you? You say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I would love to chat with you afterwards if that was not a good time. There you go, right? But introduce yourself, and the person will most likely, come back to you or make some time at the end, after that conversation, etc. So it can feel awkward, I know, I've been there. And it's just one of these things we humans do, right? Like we figure out how to go interrupt a conversation, but don't be shy about doing it. And I really do think that POPL has this culture now where a lot of people, because PLMW has been going on for so many years, I think that most senior people at POPL are very aware of the PLMW attendees and very eager to interact and expect these kinds of interruptions and so on, right? So do it. Don't be afraid.
Excellent. Thank you, Amal. And I know all of us are going to be tracking you down during POPL to talk to you.